The silver clouds of dawn stretched across the Montana sky, as Hannah James clutched her worn letter, standing alone on the wooden platform of Silver Creek's train depot, with nothing but a trunk of possessions and shattered dreams. The man who had promised to make her his wife the reason she'd traveled over 1,000 miles from Boston was nowhere to be found. Hannah drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the last whistle of the departing train faded into the distance. April 1885 brought a deceptive chill to the Western Territory, the kind that seeped through wool and settled in bones. She glanced around the near-empty platform, the reality of her situation sinking in with each passing moment. "Madam," a deep voice startled her. "Station's closing for midday." "You waiting on someone?" The station master, an older gentleman with salt and pepper whiskers, regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. I was to meet Mr. Philip Winters. He arranged for me to come as his." Hannah's voice faltered, the words mail-order bride suddenly sticking in her throat like a pit. "As his intended," she finished. The station master's expression shifted to one Hannah recognized all too well: pity. "Winters, you say?" He scratched his chin. "Ain't heard that name round these parts for weeks now. Word is he pulled stakes and headed to California. Gold fever got him." Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. "That can't be right. I received a letter just 3 weeks ago confirming our arrangement." The station master shrugged. "Sorry, miss. Men out here. Well, they change their minds quicker than the weather sometimes." Hannah swallowed hard, fighting back tears. 22 years old, and she'd gambled everything on a promise made by a stranger, her teaching position in Boston gone, the small inheritance from her aunt that had funded this journey spent, and now she stood abandoned in a town she knew nothing about, with no prospects and nowhere to go. "Is there a boarding house in town?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mrs. Peterson's up the road. But she don't take charity cases, if you'll pardon my saying so." His eyes drifted to Hannah's simple dress and worn boots. Hannah straightened her spine. "I can pay, for a few days at least." As she bent to lift her trunk, the weight of it nearly toppled her slight frame. A shadow fell across the platform. "Allow me, madam." The voice was different from the station master's, younger, with a hint of southern drawl that softened the edges of his words. Hannah looked up to find herself staring into eyes the color of summer wheat, set in a face tanned and weathered by sun and wind. He touched the brim of his Stetson, a gesture so casually courteous it momentarily silenced her. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore the practical garb of a working cowboy: denim, leather, and dust. "I'm Kent Irwin," he said, already lifting her trunk as if it weighed nothing at all. "Couldn't help but overhear. Seems you've been left in a difficult spot." Hannah managed a small nod, pride warring with the undeniable relief of finding someone willing to help. "Hannah James," she replied, "and yes, it appears I've been misled." Kent's expression hardened briefly. "Winters, should have guessed." He shifted the trunk to a more comfortable position. "I run a cattle operation about 5 miles outside town. Got a foreman's cabin sitting empty. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and safe." Hannah's eyes widened. "I couldn't possibly, just until you figure things out," Kent said quickly. "My sister and her husband live on the property too. Emily's been complaining about needing help with the household accounts. She'd welcome the company." Hannah hesitated, every lesson about propriety and caution warring with her desperate circumstances. "Mr. Irwin, while I appreciate your offer, I don't make a habit of accepting invitations from men I've just met." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Wise policy, Miss James. But I'm offering you a job and temporary lodging, not asking for your hand. And as I said, my sister's there. You'll have your privacy and your dignity." He nodded toward the distant buildings of Silver Creek, a single dusty street lined with false-fronted establishments. Town's growing, but opportunities for a woman alone are limited. Saloon work mostly, and I reckon that's not what you came west for. Hannah flinched at the frank assessment. The letter in her reticule suddenly felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric. She'd come west for a new beginning, for the promise of a home and family of her own. Now that dream lay in tatters. I was a teacher, she said finally, in Boston. Something flickered in Kent's eyes, respect, perhaps. Well then, that settles it. Emily's boys need schooling. Town's been trying to establish a proper school for months. He shifted the trunk again. So what do you say, Miss James? It's an honest offer. You can leave any time you choose. Hannah looked back at the empty train tracks, then to the unfamiliar town. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and promise. What choice did she really have? Very well, Mr. Irwin, she said at last. I accept your offer, temporarily. He nodded once as if they'd concluded a business arrangement. My wagon's this way, been in town for supplies. As they walked, he asked, You got any other baggage coming? Hannah shook her head. Just the trunk. I traveled light. Smart, he commented. Too many folks come west burdened with things they don't need. They reached a sturdy wagon loaded with wooden crates and burlap sacks. Kent secured her trunk among his supplies before offering his hand to help her onto the high seat. His palm was calloused but warm, his grip firm without being crushing. Hannah settled her skirts around her, acutely aware of how improper this all was and how little choice she had. As Kent clicked to the horses and the wagon pulled away from Silver Creek, Hannah cast one final glance back at the train station. Whatever life she'd imagined for herself with Philip Winters was gone. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also, perhaps, opportunity. How long have you been in Montana territory, Mr. Irwin? She asked, breaking the silence between them. 7 years, he replied, eyes on the road. Came up from Texas with my sister and her husband after the war. Started with 30 head of cattle and a dream. He glanced sideways at her. Now we run close to 2,000 head on 12,000 acres. Hannah's eyes widened. That's quite an achievement, Kent shrugged. Been lucky with the weather, and we work hard. He paused. What made you decide on a mail-order arrangement, if you don't mind my asking? Seems an educated woman like yourself would have prospects back east. Hannah smoothed her skirts, considering how to answer. My parents died of influenza when I was 16. I had an aunt who raised me after, but she passed last year. The school where I taught was limiting. Female teachers aren't allowed to marry, you see. We're expected to devote ourselves entirely to our students. Sounds lonely, Kent observed. It was, Hannah admitted. When I saw Mr. Winters' advertisement, she stopped herself, embarrassment washing over her. It sounded like an adventure. A chance at a different life. Kent nodded, saying nothing for a long moment. Then the West can be that. Different, I mean. Harder in some ways, more forgiving in others. He adjusted his hat against the sun. Out here, what matters is what you can do, who you are. Not where you came from or who your people were. The wagon crested a small rise, and Hannah gasped at the vista that suddenly opened before them. Rolling grasslands stretched toward distant mountains, their peaks still snow-capped despite the advancing spring. A river cut through the valley, its water glinting in the afternoon sun. That's our north pasture, Kent said, a note of pride creeping into his voice. Best grazing land in the territory. As they descended into the valley, Hannah began to make out structures in the distance, a large main house, several outbuildings, and what appeared to be bunkhouses. Closer to the river stood a smaller cabin, smoke curling from its chimney. That'll be your place, Kent nodded toward the smaller cabin. Foreman left last fall to start his own spread in Wyoming, been vacant since. It's lovely, Hannah said, genuinely impressed by the setting. It's simple, Kent corrected, but it's solid built and the roof doesn't leak. He gave her a sidelong glance. Figure you'll want to rest today. Tomorrow, I'll introduce you to Emily. She can show you around, get you settled with whatever work suits your skills. As they approached the ranch, Hannah noticed activity around the various buildings, men moving between the barn and corrals, smoke rising from what must be a cookhouse. A woman emerged from the main house, shading her eyes against the sun as she watched their approach. That's Emily now, Kent said. Probably wondering who I'm bringing home. The wagon rolled to a stop in the yard, and Emily Irwin Patterson hurried toward them. She shared her brother's wheat-colored hair, though hers was pulled back in a practical bun, tendrils escaping around her face. Her expression was openly curious as Kent helped Hannah down from the wagon. Emily, this is Miss Hannah James, Kent explained, quickly relating Hannah's situation. I've offered her the foreman's cabin and whatever work she might be suited for around the ranch. Emily's face softened with understanding and something like relief. Miss James, you are most welcome. We've been short-handed since Albert left, especially with the household matters. She shot her brother a knowing look. Kent's idea of bookkeeping involves stuffing receipts in his desk drawer and hoping they sort themselves out. Kent ducked his head, a slight flush creeping up his neck. I'll get your trunk to the cabin, he muttered, clearly uncomfortable with his sister's teasing. Emily linked her arm through Hannah's. Don't mind him. Good with cattle, hopeless with people sometimes. She lowered her voice. I'm so glad you're here. The men outnumber us 20-1, and conversation around the dinner table has been nothing but cattle prices and fence lines for months. Hannah found herself warming to Emily's friendly manner. I'm grateful for the opportunity, Mrs. Patterson, though I should warn you, I know very little about ranch life. Call me Emily, please, and don't worry, you'll learn what you need to. Besides, Kent mentioned you were a teacher. My boys, Samuel and Joseph, are 7 and 5. They've had nothing but their father and me teaching them what we can when we can. Emily's eyes lit up. Would you consider giving them proper lessons? For the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, Hannah felt a spark of genuine hope. I'd be delighted to. Emily squeezed her arm. Wonderful. Let's get you settled in the cabin first. You must be exhausted after your journey. As they walked toward the small cabin, Hannah glanced back to see Kent unloading her trunk from the wagon. He caught her looking and touched the brim of his hat again in that same courteous gesture. Despite everything, the abandonment, the uncertainty, the sheer impropriety of her current situation, Hannah felt something unfamiliar flutter in her chest. Perhaps this unexpected detour would lead somewhere after all. The foreman's cabin proved to be a simple but sturdy one-room structure with a small attached lean-to for washing. A cast-iron stove dominated one corner, while a narrow bed with a corn husk mattress occupied another. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs stood beneath the single window, which overlooked the river. It's not much, Emily apologized as Kent set Hannah's trunk at the foot of the bed. It's perfect, Hannah replied, genuinely moved by the space's simple charm. After the crowded boarding house in Boston, where she'd shared a room with 2 other teachers, having a place all to herself felt like unexpected luxury. I'll bring some linens from the main house, Emily offered. And you'll take your meals with us, of course. We eat at 6 and noon and 6 again. Kent cleared his throat. Miss James, there's a lock on the door, the keys on the mantel there. No one will disturb you. Hannah understood what he was really saying, that he respected her privacy and her safety. Thank you, Mr. Irwin. Kent, he corrected. We don't stand on formality much out here. Kent, she repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. He nodded once. I'll leave you ladies to it then. Got cattle to check before sundown. After Kent departed, Emily helped Hannah unpack her few belongings. As they worked, Emily shared the history of the ranch, how Kent had brought them west after fighting in the war, determined to build something of his own. He was just 20 when we started, Emily explained, hanging Hannah's dresses on pegs along the wall. Stubborn as a mule, but he had vision. Worked himself nearly to death those first few years. He seems very capable, Hannah observed, arranging her small collection of books on the mantel. Emily smiled. That he is. Good man, too, better than most. She paused, her expression growing serious. I should tell you, there's been talk in town about starting a proper school. Kent's on the town council. He's been pushing for it harder than anyone. Hannah's hand stilled on the book she was holding. Really? Says a growing town needs education if it wants to be more than just a cattle stop. Emily gave her a significant look. Interesting coincidence, him finding a schoolteacher in need of work, don't you think? Before Hannah could formulate a response, Emily changed the subject, moving on to practical matters of ranch life. But the seed of an idea had been planted. Perhaps Kent Irwin had extended his help not merely out of kindness, but because he saw an opportunity for the town he clearly cared about. The thought was both comforting and slightly disappointing. Hannah chided herself for the latter feeling. After Philip Winter's betrayal, she should be grateful for practical considerations rather than romantic ones. By the time Emily left to prepare dinner, Hannah had transformed the sparse cabin into something resembling a home. Her books gave the mantel character, and the quilt her aunt had made one of the few keepsakes she'd brought west brightened the narrow bed. Alone at last, Hannah sat at the small table and pulled out the letter that had brought her to Montana. Philip Winter's promises now seemed hollow, his flowery declarations of anticipation transparently false. How could she have been so naive? A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Miss James, it's Kent. His voice carried clearly through the wooden door. Brought you some firewood, getting cold tonight. Hannah quickly tucked the letter away and smoothed her hair before opening the door. Kent stood with an armload of split logs, the setting sun casting long shadows across the yard behind him. Thank you, she said, stepping aside to let him enter. He stacked the wood neatly beside the stove, his movements efficient and practiced. Emily says you're joining us for supper. I'll walk you up to the house when you're ready. Hannah hesitated. Mr. Irwin Kent, I want to thank you properly for your kindness today. You had no obligation to help me, yet you did. He straightened, brushing wood chips from his shirt. No thanks needed. Anyone would have done the same. I don't believe that's true, Hannah said softly. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps at her directness. Well, he said after a moment, I'm glad I was the one who happened by then. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, Hannah felt a strange connection, as if they'd known each other longer than mere hours. Kent broke the silence first. Better get up to the house. Emily gets cross if we're late to table, and her biscuits aren't worth eating once they're cold. As they walked together in the gathering dusk, Hannah realized she felt more at peace than she had in months. The uncertainty of her future remained, but somehow in this place, with these people, the weight of it seemed lighter. Dinner at the Patterson-Irwin table proved to be a lively affair. Emily's husband, Daniel, was a gregarious man whose booming laugh filled the cozy dining room. Their sons, Samuel and Joseph, regarded Hannah with naked curiosity, bombarding her with questions about Boston and trains and whether she knew how to shoot a gun. Boys, Emily scolded gently. Let Miss James eat. It's quite all right, Hannah assured her, charmed by the children's enthusiasm. And no, Joseph, I don't know how to shoot, though perhaps that's a skill I should acquire out here." "Kent could teach you," Samuel suggested, his mouth full of mashed potatoes. "He's the best shot in the territory." Kent, who had been quietly eating at the head of the table, looked up with a wry expression. "Don't believe everything the Cowboys tell you, Samuel. But you won the shooting contest at last year's Founders' Day," the boy insisted. "Pure luck," Kent demurred, though Hannah caught the hint of a pleased smile before he hid it behind his napkin. Daniel changed the subject, filling Hannah in on the history of Silver Creek and the surrounding territory. Founded initially as a trading post in the 1850s, the town had grown with the cattle industry's expansion after the Civil War. "We're hoping the railroad spur will come through next year," he explained. "Would make getting cattle to market a sight easier. And bring more families," Emily added. "More women especially." She gave Hannah a meaningful look. "Town needs civilizing influences." Kent snorted softly. "Town needs to focus on cattle prices before worrying about getting civilized. See what I mean?" Emily said to Hannah with an exaggerated sigh. "All business, this one." Hannah found herself smiling at the easy banter between siblings. It reminded her of happier times with her own family, before illness had claimed her parents and altered the course of her life forever. After dinner, while Emily settled the boys for bed, Daniel invited Kent and Hannah to join him on the porch for coffee. The night air had turned cool, and Hannah gratefully accepted the woolen shawl Kent offered her from a hook by the door. "So, Miss James," Daniel began once they were settled in rocking chairs, "Kent tells me you're a trained teacher." "I am," she confirmed. "I taught at the Mayfield School for Girls in Boston for 4 years. Daniel and Kent exchanged glances. "Interesting," Daniel said. "You see, Silver Creek's been collecting funds for a schoolhouse. Got the building up last fall, but finding a qualified teacher willing to come west." He shrugged. "Hasn't been easy." Hannah's pulse quickened. "Are you suggesting we've been making do with Mrs. Miller from the Mercantile teaching basic reading and figures 2 afternoons a week?" Ken explained. "But with 15 children in town now, and more coming with spring arrivals. The town council would be mighty interested in discussing a more permanent arrangement," Daniel finished. "Assuming you'd be interested, of course." Hannah's mind raced with possibilities. A teaching position, a real one, not just tutoring ranch children, would provide her independence and purpose. It wouldn't be the future she'd imagined when boarding the train east, but perhaps it would be something better, a life of her own making. "I would certainly be interested in discussing it," she said carefully. "Though I should warn you, I've only taught girls before." Kent chuckled. "Western boys might be a bit more rambunctious than you're used to, but they're just as capable of learning." "I have no doubt," Hannah replied, meeting his gaze. "Children are children, regardless of geography." The conversation drifted to practical matters: the school term, potential salary, boarding arrangements in town. Hannah found herself impressed by how seriously both men took the matter of education, particularly Kent, who spoke passionately about the need for learning beyond just practical skills. "A community needs thinkers as well as doers," he said at one point, staring thoughtfully into the darkness beyond the porch. "Otherwise, what are we building out here? Just another place for people to scrape by." Hannah studied his profile, illuminated by the soft glow from the house windows. There was more to Kent Irwin than the taciturn cowboy she'd initially perceived. Much more. As the evening grew late, Kent offered to walk Hannah back to her cabin. They moved through the cool darkness in companionable silence, the sounds of night creatures creating a symphony around them. Halfway there, Hannah stumbled slightly on the uneven path, and Kent's hand shot out to steady her, warm and strong against her elbow. "Careful," he murmured. "Path gets rough here." "Thank you," she replied, acutely aware of the lingering warmth when he released her arm. At her door, Kent hesitated. "Emily will come by in the morning to show you around properly, if you need anything before then." He gestured vaguely toward the main house. "I'll be fine," Hannah assured him. "Truly, you've all been kinder than I could have hoped." He shifted his weight, suddenly seeming almost shy. What happened with Winters, it wasn't right, but maybe it was fortunate in its way. At her questioning look, he continued, "Silver Creek needs a teacher, good people here, building something worthwhile." Hannah smiled. "Perhaps you're right, Mr. Irwin. Perhaps this is exactly where I'm meant to be." With a tip of his hat, Kent bid her good night, his tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness as he walked back toward the main house. Hannah watched him go, a curious warmth spreading through her chest despite the cool night air. Inside her cabin, she lit the lamp and prepared for bed, the events of the day washing over her in waves. Just that morning, she had been a mail-order bride with dreams of a ready-made life. Now she was. What, exactly? A woman standing at the threshold of an entirely different future, uncertain, yes, but also strangely exhilarating. As she drifted toward sleep, Hannah found herself thinking not of Philip Winters and his broken promises, but of wheat-colored eyes and a strong hand steadying her in the darkness. Hannah woke before dawn, the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch rousing her from slumber. She dressed quickly, the chill air raising goosebumps on her skin as she moved about the cabin. Outside her window, the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and deep blue. She stoked the stove and put water on to boil, grateful for the supplies Emily had thoughtfully provided. As she waited for her tea, Hannah stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching as the ranch came to life around her. Men emerged from the bunkhouse, heading toward the cookhouse where smoke already rose from the chimney. A young boy led horses to the corral, his breath fogging in the morning air. Movement caught her eye. Kent, striding from the barn, saddle over one shoulder. Even at a distance, there was no mistaking his tall figure. Hannah found herself watching him, noting how the other ranch hands deferred to him with nods and quick exchanges. He paused to speak with an older man, pointing toward the distant pastures, his demeanor calm but authoritative. A voice startled her from her observations. "He's up with the sun every day, that one, never takes a moment for himself." Hannah turned to find Emily approaching, a covered basket in her hands. "Good morning," she greeted, hoping the early light hid the blush warming her cheeks. "I was just admiring the view." Emily's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. "I've brought breakfast. Figured you might prefer a quiet meal your first morning instead of facing the chaos of our table." "That's very thoughtful," Hannah said, welcoming her inside. As they shared fresh biscuits, jam, and hot coffee, Emily outlined the day ahead. "I thought I'd show you around the ranch this morning, then introduce you to the boys' studies so you can see where they stand. After lunch, if you're agreeable, we could ride into town. The council meets today, perfect chance to introduce you as our potential schoolteacher." Hannah nearly choked on her coffee. "So soon?" Emily shrugged. "No sense waiting. Besides, it'll give you a chance to see Silver Creek properly, meet some folks." She hesitated. "Including some eligible ones if you're still inclined toward matrimony." Hannah set down her cup. "I think I'll focus on teaching for now," she said firmly. "The matrimony business hasn't worked out particularly well for me so far." Emily studied her thoughtfully. "Fair enough. Though I should warn you, word travels fast in small towns. The moment folks hear there's a new single woman in the territory, especially one as pretty and educated as yourself, you'll have callers whether you want them or not." Hannah hadn't considered this aspect of her new situation. In Boston, She'd been just one of many unmarried female teachers, practically invisible in her spinsterhood. Here, she would be a novelty, a rarity. "I'll manage," she said, though uncertainty crept into her voice. "Of course you will," Emily agreed. "And having Kent's name attached to yours, even just as your employer, will keep the worst of the fortune hunters at bay." After breakfast, Emily made good on her promise to show Hannah around the ranch. They visited the cookhouse, where the gruff but kind-hearted cook, Hank, insisted Hannah try his famous sourdough bread. They toured the barn, chicken coops and vegetable garden which Emily tended with obvious pride. "We try to be as self-sufficient as possible," she explained. "Winter supply wagons don't always make it through the passes." Throughout the tour, Hannah caught glimpses of Kent working with the cattle in the distance, sometimes on horseback, other times on foot among the men. Each time, her eyes lingered a moment too long, drawn to his confident movements and the easy authority he commanded. By mid-morning, they had reached the corrals where several cowboys were working with young horses. Kent stood at the fence, his attention focused on a spirited black gelding being led around by a wiry, middle-aged man. "That's Charlie, our horse trainer," Emily explained as they approached. "Best in the territory with difficult animals." Kent noticed their arrival and straightened. "Morning, Miss James. Sleep well?" "Very well, thank you," Hannah replied, suddenly conscious of her plain dress and practical hairstyle beside his masculine vigor. He looked as if he'd already put in a full day's work, yet showed no signs of fatigue. "Emily mentioned taking you to town this afternoon," he said. "Thought I might ride along, introduce you to Judge Millerson. He heads the school board." "That would be helpful, thank you," Hannah replied, oddly pleased by his continued involvement in her affairs. Kent turned back to the corral, where the black gelding was now trotting smoothly around the enclosure. "Charlie's working wonders with that one. Was practically wild when we found him with a barbed wire cut last fall." Hannah watched the horse, admiring its gleaming coat and proud carriage. "He's beautiful." "He is," Ken agreed. "Thought about keeping him for myself, but he's too spirited for everyday ranch work." "You should see Kent ride," Emily interjected. "Won the bronc busting at last year's rodeo in Helena." Kent shot his sister a quelling look. "Miss James isn't interested in rodeo tales." "On the contrary," Hannah found herself saying, "I find all aspects of ranch life fascinating." A small smile quirked the corner of Kent's mouth. "In that case, perhaps you'd like to learn to ride properly while you're here." "Can't get far in Montana on foot." "I'd like that very much," Hannah agreed, surprising herself with her enthusiasm. In Boston, horseback riding for ladies was a genteel activity confined to parks and bridle paths. Here, it was clearly a necessary skill for survival and independence. "Good," Kent said. "We'll start tomorrow if that suits. Got a gentle mare that would be perfect for beginners." Emily cleared her throat meaningfully. "Perhaps we should continue our tour, Hannah. I still need to show you the schoolroom we've set up for the boys." As they walked away, Emily nudged Hannah playfully. "Well now, I haven't seen my brother offer to teach anyone to ride since little Joseph. He must think you're worth the effort." Hannah felt her cheeks warm again. "He's simply being practical. As you said, one needs to ride in Montana." "Hum," Emily hummed skeptically. "Just like he practically decided to come along to town today when he's got 100 tasks needing his attention here." "Emily," Hannah protested weakly, though a small thrill ran through her at the implication. The remainder of the morning passed quickly. The schoolroom proved to be a converted storage room in the main house, simply furnished with a small table, chairs, and a bookshelf containing a modest but respectable collection of texts. The boys joined them for an impromptu lesson. and Hannah was pleased to discover they were bright and eager students, if somewhat behind in their formal education compared to city children their age. After lunch, Hannah changed into her best remaining dress, a dark blue wool with minimal trim for the trip to town. She was pinning her hair into a more formal arrangement when another knock came at her door. Kent stood outside, holding the reins of 3 saddled horses. He'd clearly made an effort with his own appearance. His hair was damp from washing, and he wore a clean shirt under his vest. "Thought we'd ride rather than take the wagon," he explained. "Shorter journey and gives you a chance to see more of the ranch." Hannah eyed the smallest of the 3 horses, a dun-colored mare with a gentle eye. "I should warn you, my riding experience is limited to being led around a Boston park on a very elderly pony when I was 12. Kent's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Figured as much. That's why I brought Daisy here. She's got more sense than most people I know. Won't let you fall." With surprising patience, Kent demonstrated how to mount properly, how to hold the reins, and the basic commands to direct the horse. His hands were steady and impersonal as he adjusted her stirrups, but Hannah couldn't help noticing how they dwarfed her small boots. Emily watched the instruction with poorly concealed amusement until Kent shot her a look. "Something funny, Em?" "Not at all," she replied innocently. "Just thinking how much Hannah's outfit will impress the town ladies." Hannah glanced down at her dress, suddenly concerned. "Is it inappropriate?" "I don't want to seem you look perfect," Kent interrupted. "Emily's just being difficult." The ride to Silver Creek took nearly an hour, during which Kent pointed out landmarks and boundaries of the ranch. Hannah gradually grew more comfortable in the saddle, though she suspected she would be sore tomorrow. The sight of the town appearing in the distance gave her a curious mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Silver Creek had changed since her brief glimpse the day before. The single street was busy with wagons and riders, the wooden sidewalks populated with townspeople going about their business. As they rode in, Hannah noted the essential buildings of Frontier Life General Store, saloon, blacksmith, small church, and what appeared to be a newly constructed schoolhouse at the far end of the street. They tied their horses at the hitching post outside the mercantile. Kent helped Hannah dismount, his hands firm around her waist as he lifted her down. For a brief moment, they stood close enough that Hannah could detect the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "Thank you," she murmured, stepping back and smoothing her skirts to hide her momentary flustered state. "Kent Irwin," a booming voice called. A barrel-chested man with an impressive mustache and a worn suit coat approached, hand extended. "Just the man I was hoping to see." "Judge Millerson," Kent greeted, shaking the offered hand. "Good timing. I'd like you to meet Miss Hannah James. Miss James, this is Judge Millerson, head of our town council and school board." The judge bowed slightly. "Miss James, a pleasure." "Miss James is a trained teacher from Boston," Kent explained. 4 years' experience at a prestigious girls' school there." The judge's bushy eyebrows shot up. "Is that so?" He studied Hannah with newfound interest. "Well now, that is fortunate timing. We've been advertising for a teacher these past 6 months with no success. Miss James may be interested in the position," Kent said, his tone carefully neutral. "Thought you might want to discuss particulars with her." Judge Millerson beamed. "Indeed I would. Perhaps you join me for tea at the hotel dining room, Miss James. We can discuss the position properly." Hannah glanced at Kent, who nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead. Emily and I have some business at the mercantile. We'll find you after." As Hannah walked away with the judge, she felt Kent's eyes on her back. Despite the unexpectedness of her current circumstances, a curious sense of rightness settled over her. This wasn't the life she'd planned, but already it felt more substantial, more real than the vague promises that had brought her west. The meeting with Judge Millerson and 2 other school board members proved more promising than Hannah could have hoped. The salary offered was modest, but included housing a small room attached to the schoolhouse and the freedom to develop her own curriculum. "We've got children from 6 to 14 needing education," Judge Millerson explained. "Some have had schooling back east, others none at all. It's a challenging position, but vital to our community's future." "When would you want me to start?" Hannah asked, already mentally cataloging the books and supplies she would need. "How does next Monday sound? Gives you time to settle in and prepare." The judge leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I won't pretend it's an easy task, Miss James. These are frontier children, used to hard work and practical learning. They need someone who can be firm but understanding." Hannah thought of her years teaching privileged Boston girls, many of whom viewed education as merely a finishing touch before marriage. The challenge of inspiring children who truly needed learning appealed to her deeply. "I accept," she said firmly. The judge's face split into a wide grin. "Excellent. We'll have the schoolroom ready for you, and Mrs. Miller at the Mercantile has been keeping a list of needed supplies. The town council approved funds for books and slates last month." They were discussing housing arrangements when Kent and Emily joined them. The judge quickly shared the news of Hannah's acceptance. "Wonderful," Emily exclaimed. "Though I must say, my boys will be disappointed to lose their private teacher so soon." "Perhaps they could join the town school," Hannah suggested. "I could arrange transportation for them if the distance is a concern." Kent, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "I'll bring them in myself when weather permits. It'll do them good to learn alongside other children." The remainder of the afternoon passed in a whirlwind of introductions as Kent and Emily guided Hannah through town. At the Mercantile, she met Mrs. Miller, a sharp-eyed woman whose excitement at meeting a real Boston teacher was palpable. At the newspaper office, Mr. Green promised a front-page announcement of the school's official opening. Everywhere they went, Hannah was received with curiosity and surprisingly warm welcome. By the time they headed back to the ranch, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the trail. Hannah's head buzzed with names, faces, and plans for her new role. She rode in thoughtful silence, processing the day's events, having second thoughts. Kent asked, guiding his horse alongside hers. Hannah shook her head. "Not at all. Just realizing how different this is from what I expected when I boarded that train in Boston. Different better or different worse?" She considered the question seriously. "Different. Truer, I think. The life Mr. Winters described in his letters seemed too perfect, too easy. This," she gestured at the rugged landscape around them, "this is real, challenging, certainly, but honest." Kent studied her with an unreadable expression. "Most Easterners find Montana too harsh. They come seeking adventure but leave when they realize the work involved." "I'm not afraid of work, Mr. Irwin," Hannah replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "I may have come west for the wrong reasons, but I intend to stay for the right ones." Something shifted in his expression, then respect, perhaps, or recognition. "Glad to hear it," he said simply. That evening, Kent surprised Hannah by joining her for a simple supper in her cabin. He arrived bearing a pot of Emily's stew and fresh bread, explaining that his sister had been called away to tend a neighboring ranch wife in early labor. "Hope you don't mind the company," he said, setting the food on her small table. "Thought you might want to discuss your plans for the school." They ate together by lamplight, the conversation flowing more easily than Hannah would have expected. Kent proved knowledgeable about educational needs in the territory, describing the mixed backgrounds of Silver Creek's children and the practical skills they would need to thrive. Reading, writing, and figures are important, he acknowledged, but so is understanding the land, the weather patterns, local history. These children will inherit this place. They need to know how to care for it properly. Hannah found herself moved by his evident love for Montana and its future. "You've given this considerable thought," Kent shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "Been pushing for a proper school since we settled here. Education's what separates civilized communities from just collections of buildings." "A surprisingly progressive view for a cattleman," Hannah observed. "My father was a teacher," Kent revealed, surprising her. "Back in Virginia before the war. Believed learning was the most valuable thing a person could possess more than land or money." "He sounds like a wise man." "He was." A shadow crossed Kent's face. "Died at Antietam. I was 15. Hannah's heart constricted at the quiet pain in his voice. "I'm sorry." Kent nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy without dwelling on it. "What about your folks? You mentioned they passed when you were young." "Yes, influenza took them both within a week of each other. I was 16. Hannah traced the rim of her coffee cup. "My father was a bookkeeper. Very precise, very proper. My mother taught piano to neighborhood children." "And they would think of their daughter heading west as a mail-order bride?" Kent asked, his tone gentle rather than judgmental. Hannah sighed. "Truthfully, they would have been horrified, but after they died and then my aunt last year, Boston held nothing for me but memories and limitations." She met his eyes across the table. "I wanted a life of my own making." "And now?" Kent asked quietly. "Now I think perhaps I've found it," Hannah replied. "Just not in the way I expected." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. Kent's eyes, warm in the lamplight, held hers for a long moment before he cleared his throat and stood. "Getting late," he said. "You must be tired after all the excitement today." At the door, he hesitated. "First riding lesson tomorrow if you're still interested, after breakfast." Hannah nodded. "I'd like that." "Good," he said softly. "Good night, Miss James." "Hannah," she corrected. "If I'm to call you Kent, you should use my given name as well." A small smile curved his mouth. "Hannah, then. Sleep well." As she prepared for bed that night, Hannah found herself replaying their conversation, analyzing each word and glance. It was foolish, she knew, to read too much into Kent's kindness. He was simply a decent man helping someone in need, just as he'd done when he found her stranded at the train station. And yet, as sleep claimed her, Hannah couldn't help but wonder if fate had led her to Silver Creek not as a cruel joke, but as a redirect towards someone far better than she could have planned for herself. The next morning dawned clear and warm, a perfect spring day in Montana territory. Hannah rose early, anticipation for her riding lesson lending energy to her movements. She chose a simple skirt and shirtwaist, practical clothes for learning to ride. Ken arrived just as she finished breakfast, leading 2 horses, Daisy, the gentle mare from yesterday, and a tall chestnut gelding that danced impatiently at the end of its lead rope. "Ready for your first proper lesson?" he asked, his eyes crinkling with good humor. Hannah nodded, determined to show him she wasn't afraid of challenges. "Absolutely." They walked to a small corral behind the barn, where Kent first demonstrated how to properly saddle a horse, explaining each step with patient clarity. Hannah watched his capable hands work, noting how even the spirited chestnut quieted under his touch. "Horses respond to confidence," he explained, tightening the cinch on Daisy's saddle. "They can sense fear or uncertainty. The trick is to be firm but gentle, let them know you're in charge, but won't harm them." "Rather like teaching children," Hannah observed. Kent looked up, surprise flickering across his face before he smiled. "Never thought of it that way, but you're right." The lesson progressed from mounting and basic seat position to walking and stopping. Kent was an excellent teacher, his instructions clear and his patience seemingly endless. When Hannah finally managed to guide Daisy in a complete circle around the corral without assistance, the smile he gave her was full of genuine pride. "You're a natural," he said, walking beside her as she completed another circuit. Hannah laughed. "I think Daisy deserves most of the credit." "Don't sell yourself short," Kent replied. "Takes most Easterners weeks to get comfortable in a Western saddle." By the end of the 2-hour lesson, Hannah had progressed to a gentle trot, though her posture was far from perfect. As they cooled down the horses, walking them slowly around the ranch yard, Kent outlined what they would work on next time. "Once you're comfortable with trotting, we'll try a canter. After that, we'll take some short trails so you can experience different terrain. At this rate, I'll be participating in your rodeo competitions by summer," Hannah joked. Kent's gaze swept over her, assessing. "Wouldn't surprise me," he said, and Hannah couldn't tell if he was teasing or serious. "You've got determination, that's clear enough." As they approached the cabin to end their lesson, Hannah saw Emily waving from the main house porch. "Looks like my sister wants a word," Kent observed. "Probably about the boys' lessons. Will you join us?" They left the horses ground tied and walked to the main house, where Emily was waiting with obvious excitement. "Hannah, the most wonderful news! Judge Millerson just sent word that the town will host a social this Saturday to welcome you officially as Silver Creek's teacher." Emily clasped Hannah's hands. Anyone will attend. It's the perfect opportunity to meet the parents of your future students." Hannah blinked, overwhelmed by the sudden announcement. "That's very kind, but I've only just accepted the position. I haven't even moved to town yet." "Which is why the social is perfect timing," Emily insisted. "You can meet everyone, then settle into the schoolhouse quarters on Sunday, ready to begin teaching Monday." She turned to her brother. "Kent, you'll escort Hannah, of course." Kent looked as surprised as Hannah felt. "I don't recall being consulted about this plan." Emily waved away his protest. "Don't be difficult. You're on the town council, you should be there to support our new teacher." Hannah felt caught between the siblings' exchange. "Perhaps I could simply attend on my own." "I wouldn't want to impose on Kent's time." "Nonsense," Emily declared. "A young woman arriving alone would cause gossip. Besides, Kent cleans up nicely when he puts his mind to it." She shot her brother a pointed look. "Don't you?" Kent sighed, recognizing defeat. "I'd be honored to escort you, Hannah, if you're agreeable, that is." Despite her misgivings about imposing, Hannah found herself nodding. "Thank you, that would be lovely." Emily beamed triumphantly. "Excellent. Now about your dress. I think my blue silk might be altered to fit you." "You're smaller than me, but nothing a few tucks couldn't fix." "Oh, I couldn't possibly," Hannah began. "I insist," Emily interrupted. "Consider it a welcome gift. Besides, your Boston dresses, while lovely, might seem a bit too Eastern for a frontier social." Kent excused himself to return to his ranch duties, leaving Hannah to Emily's enthusiastic planning. As the week progressed, Hannah divided her time between preparing for her teaching role, continuing her daily riding lessons with Kent, and being fitted for the altered blue silk dress that Emily was determined would make a favorable impression on the townspeople. The riding lessons quickly became Hannah's favorite part of each day. Kent proved to be not only an excellent instructor, but also engaging company. As her confidence on horseback grew, so did their conversations, ranging from books they'd both read to philosophical discussions about the future of the West. On Thursday, Kent surprised her by extending their lesson into a short trail ride beyond the confines of the ranch yard. They followed a path along the river, the water sparkling in the morning sunlight, mountains rising majestically in the distance. "It's breathtaking," Hannah said, reining Daisy to a stop at a particularly scenic overlook. "I've never seen anything like it." Kent watched her, something warm in his expression. "Different from Boston, I imagine, completely, but in the best possible way." She turned to him, suddenly serious. "Thank you, Kent. For all of this, the lessons, the teaching position, even just for stopping to help me that day at the station. I don't know what would have become of me if you hadn't." "You'd have managed," he said simply. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Their eyes met, and Hannah felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. In just a few days, this man had come to occupy an increasingly large space in her thoughts. His quiet strength, his evident intelligence beneath the cowboy exterior, his unwavering kindness all combined to create a man unlike any she'd known before. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Kent's horse shifted restlessly, breaking the spell. "We should head back," Kent said, his voice slightly rough. "Clouds coming in from the west. Might rain later." As they rode home in companionable silence, Hannah reflected on how quickly Silver Creek and the Irwin Ranch had begun to feel like home. In less than a week, she had gone from abandoned mail-order bride to respected schoolteacher with growing friendships and purpose. And beneath it all ran a current of something else, something warm and hopeful whenever Kent was near. Saturday arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect weather for the town social. Hannah spent the morning helping Emily prepare dishes to bring a wild berry cobbler and fresh bread while trying to quell her nerves about the evening ahead. "Everyone will adore you," Emily assured her as they worked side by side in the kitchen. "Just be yourself." In the afternoon, Emily helped Hannah dress in the altered blue silk, arranging her hair in a style more elaborate than Hannah's usual practical arrangement. The effect, when Hannah finally looked in the mirror, was striking. The deep blue brought out the green in her eyes, and the simplified frontier style of the dress suited her far better than her fussy Boston garments had. "You look beautiful," Emily declared, satisfaction evident in her voice. "Kent won't know what hit him." "Emily," Hannah protested weakly, "this isn't about Kent." "Of course not," Emily agreed with a knowing smile. "It's about making a good impression on the town. But if my stubborn brother finally notices what's right in front of him, I won't complain." Before Hannah could formulate a response, a knock came at the bedroom door. Daniel's voice called through. "Ladies, Kent's here with the wagon. Says we should start if we want to make it to town before the social begins." Hannah's heart quickened at the thought of Kent waiting below. She took a final glance in the mirror, squared her shoulders, and followed Emily downstairs. Kent stood in the front room, dressed in what was clearly his finest clothing: dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a well-tailored vest. His usual Stetson had been replaced by a newer, uncreased version, and his boots gleamed with fresh polish. He turned as Hannah descended the stairs, and the expression that crossed his face made her breath catch. For a moment, he simply stared, something like wonder in his eyes. Then he cleared his throat. "Miss James, you look very nice." From anyone else, the words might have seemed inadequate. But coming from Kent, accompanied by that intense gaze, they carried a weight that sent warmth flooding through Hannah. "Thank you," she replied softly. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Irwin." The drive to town passed quickly, filled with Daniel's jovial conversation and the boys' excitement about the social. Kent remained quieter than usual, though Hannah caught him glancing her way several times when he thought she wouldn't notice. Silver Creek had transformed for the occasion. Lanterns hung from every available post, casting a warm glow over the main street. The town hall, normally used for council meetings and church services, had been decorated with spring wildflowers and ribbons. A small band was setting up on a makeshift stage at one end of the large room, and tables laden with food lined the walls. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. Judge Millerson hurried forward to greet them, escorting Hannah around the room to make introductions. Kent stayed close by her side, a reassuring presence as she met what seemed like the entire population of Silver Creek in rapid succession. "Miss James, we're so pleased you've agreed to take the teaching position," Mrs. Peterson, a formidable woman with steel gray hair, declared. "My grandson Jacob has been running wild without proper schooling. He needs a firm hand." "I look forward to meeting him," Hannah replied diplomatically. "Miss James taught at the prestigious Mayfield School in Boston," Kent interjected. "She's more than qualified to handle even the most spirited students." Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "Is that so? Well, that is impressive." Similar conversations played out repeatedly as Hannah met parents, townspeople, and prospective students. Throughout it all, Kent remained by her side, occasionally adding comments that highlighted her qualifications or gently steering conversations when they became overwhelming. His support, unobtrusive but constant, gave Hannah confidence she might otherwise have lacked in the face of such scrutiny. When the band began to play, couples moved to the center of the room to dance. Hannah watched, enjoying the lively music and the obvious pleasure of the dancers. "Would you care to dance?" Kent asked quietly beside her. Hannah turned to him in surprise. "I didn't take you for a dancing man, Mr. Irwin." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "There's a lot you don't know about me yet, Miss James." The yet hung between them, pregnant with possibility. "In that case," Hannah replied, "I would be delighted." Kent led her onto the dance floor, one hand settling respectfully at her waist while the other clasped hers. The music was a simple waltz, and Hannah discovered that Kent moved with unexpected grace for a man who spent his days on horseback and working cattle. "You dance very well," she observed as he guided her smoothly through a turn. "My mother insisted we learn," he explained. "Said no child of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a wounded buffalo." Hannah laughed, delighted by this glimpse into his past. "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Kent agreed, a softness entering his expression. "You remind me of her sometimes, your determination, the way you face challenges head-on." The compliment warmed Hannah more than she could express. They continued to dance, conversation flowing easily between them as the music played on. When the waltz ended, Kent reluctantly released her as another townsman approached to claim a dance. "Miss James, I'm Robert Clark, owner of the Silver Creek Bank. May I have the honor?" Hannah looked to Kent, who stepped back with a courteous nod. "Of course. I'll fetch us some punch." As the evening progressed, Hannah danced with several of the town's leading citizens, each using the opportunity to learn more about their new teacher. She answered questions about her educational philosophy, her experience, and her impressions of Montana with growing confidence. Between dances, she found herself returning to Kent's side, drawn to his steady presence amid the swirl of new faces and names. He introduced her to trusted friends, shared amusing anecdotes about town history, and ensured she never felt overwhelmed. During a brief lull in the festivities, as the band took a break, Judge Millerson called for the room's attention. Standing on the small stage, he raised his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to propose a toast to our newest citizen, Miss Hannah James, who has graciously agreed to take on the vital role of schoolteacher for Silver Creek." Cheers and applause filled the room. Judge Millerson continued, "Miss James comes to us highly qualified, with years of experience teaching at one of Boston's finest academies. We are fortunate indeed that circumstances have brought her to our community." Hannah felt her cheeks warm at the attention, especially when the judge gestured for her to join him on the stage. Kent gave her an encouraging nod, and she made her way forward on slightly unsteady legs. "Thank you all for such a warm welcome," she said, her voice clear despite her nerves. "I'm honored by your trust and excited to begin working with your children. Silver Creek may not be where I expected to find myself, but I already feel it's where I belong." Her eyes found Kent's in the crowd as she spoke the last words. Something passed between them, a recognition, an acknowledgement of how their chance meeting had changed both their lives. After her brief speech, the social continued with renewed energy. Hannah found herself surrounded by mothers eager to discuss their children, merchants offering discount supplies for the school, and several unmarried men attempting to secure future dances. Through it all, Kent maintained a watchful distance, never hovering but always somehow there when she needed rescue from an overly persistent questioner or a moment's respite from the constant socializing. As the evening drew to a close, Hannah found herself standing on the town hall's small porch, breathing in the cool night air. Kent joined her, offering his jacket when he noticed her slight shiver. "Successful evening," he commented, draping the coat around her shoulders. The warmth of it, carrying his scent, enveloped her comfortingly. "More than I could have hoped," Hannah agreed. "The community seems genuinely supportive of education. They are, been waiting for someone like you." Kent leaned against the porch railing, his profile strong in the lantern light. "Someone with vision and proper training. I just hope I can live up to their expectations." Kent turned to her fully. "You will, no doubt in my mind." The certainty in his voice bolstered her confidence. "Thank you for your faith in me and for everything, really." Inside, the band had struck up a final waltz. The music drifted through the open doors, sweet and melodious in the night air. "One more dance before we head back?" Kent asked, offering his hand. Hannah placed her fingers in his without hesitation. Here on the porch, away from the crowd, the dance felt more intimate. Kent held her slightly closer than propriety strictly allowed, though still respectful. Hannah could feel the solid strength of him as they moved together under the stars. "I'll miss our riding lessons," she said softly. "Once I move to town tomorrow." Kent's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "No reason they can't continue. I come to town regularly for business. Could bring Daisy for you, show you more of the surrounding country on weekends." Hope fluttered in Hannah's chest. "I'd like that very much." As the music drew to a close, they slowed but didn't immediately separate. For a heartbeat, Hannah thought Kent might kiss her. His eyes dropped briefly to her lips, and he seemed to sway imperceptibly closer. The moment was broken by Emily's voice calling from inside. "Kent, Hannah. We should start back if we want to beat the storm rolling in." Kent stepped back, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "Best not keep her waiting. Emily hates driving in the rain." The journey back to the ranch was quieter than the trip to town had been. The boys, exhausted from the excitement, fell asleep against their mother, while Daniel and Kent discussed an approaching weather system that might affect the spring calving. Hannah sat beside Kent on the wagon bench, acutely aware of his proximity and the way his arm occasionally brushed hers as he guided the horses. Above them, clouds scudded across the night sky, occasionally revealing stars so bright and numerous they took Hannah's breath away. "Different from Boston nights," Kent observed, following her upward gaze. "Yes," Hannah agreed. "There the city lights obscure all but the brightest stars. Here, it's as if the heavens have been unveiled." Kent smiled in the darkness. "One of the things I love most about Montana. Makes a person feel both small and significant at the same time." "Exactly," Hannah said, pleased he understood. "As if we're just brief moments in time, but also part of something eternal." Kent glanced at her, surprise and something warmer in his expression. "You know, Hannah James, you're not at all what I expected when I found you at that train station." "Is that good or bad?" she asked, only half teasing. His answer was serious. "Better than I could have imagined." They reached the ranch just as the first raindrops began to fall. Daniel quickly ushered Emily and the sleeping boys into the main house while Kent walked Hannah to her cabin. At her door, he hesitated. "I'll help you move your things to town tomorrow," he offered, "after church services." "That's very kind, thank you." Hannah reluctantly removed his jacket, which she'd worn for the entire ride home, and returned it to him. "Well, good night, Kent." He took the jacket, his fingers briefly touching hers. "Good night, Hannah, sweet dreams." As she prepared for bed that night, Hannah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 1 week. From abandoned bride to respected teacher, from stranger to— what exactly? Friend, certainly. But the way Kent had looked at her tonight, the way her heart quickened when he was near, those suggested possibilities beyond friendship. Was she foolish to feel this way so soon after Philip Winter's betrayal? Perhaps. But this connection with Kent felt fundamentally different, built on mutual respect and genuine understanding rather than romantic fantasies and empty promises. Tomorrow she would move to town, begin her new life properly. But as she drifted towards sleep, Hannah realized that leaving the ranch would be bittersweet. In just a week, it had begun to feel like home, and the man who had offered her shelter when she had nowhere else to turn had begun to feel like something she dared not yet name, even to herself. Sunday morning dawned bright despite the overnight rain, the world washed clean and glistening in the early light. Hannah packed her few belongings with care, lingering over each task as if to prolong her time at the ranch. Though she knew her move to town was necessary and right, a part of her already ached at the thought of leaving this place where she had found such unexpected welcome. After attending church services in Silver Creek, where Hannah was once again the center of much friendly attention, Kent loaded her trunk into his wagon for the short journey to the schoolhouse. Emily, Daniel, and the boys came along to help her settle in, turning the occasion into a family affair. The teachers' quarters attached to the schoolhouse proved more spacious than Hannah had anticipated. A small sitting room with a stone fireplace opened into a tidy bedroom, with a compact kitchen occupying the rear portion of the building. Simple but well-made furniture filled the rooms: a bed, dresser, table with chairs, and even a small bookshelf. "The town council had this built last fall," Kent explained as he carried her trunk inside. "Been sitting empty, waiting for the right teacher to come along." Emily bustled about, arranging Hannah's belongings and adding homey touches: a crocheted blanket for the bed, curtains for the windows, a basket of preserves and fresh bread for the kitchen. "It's perfect," Hannah said, genuinely pleased with her new home. Through the connecting door, she could see the schoolroom itself: rows of simple desks facing a larger teacher's desk, a blackboard covering one wall, and large windows letting in ample light. The boys explored the schoolroom with interest, Samuel already claiming a desk as his for the coming term. Daniel and Kent conferred about minor repairs: a loose floorboard that needed securing, a window that didn't quite latch properly. "I'll fix these things before I head back," Kent assured Hannah. "Want to make sure you're settled properly." As afternoon wore on, Emily, Daniel, and the boys prepared to return to the ranch, leaving Kent to complete the promised repairs. "We'll see you for dinner next Sunday," Emily insisted, hugging Hannah warmly. "And the boys will be here bright and early for school tomorrow, won't you?" Samuel and Joseph nodded solemnly, though Joseph added, "Do we have to sit all day, Miss James?" Hannah smiled. "I believe in regular breaks for fresh air and movement. Growing boys need exercise as well as book learning. This assurance seemed to satisfy him, and the family departed with final waves and calls of good luck for her first day of teaching. Left alone with Kent, Hannah felt a sudden awkwardness descend. He worked quietly, fixing the identified problems with efficient movements, while she arranged her books and teaching materials for the morning. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked finally, breaking the silence as he tested the repaired window latch. "A little," Hannah admitted. "It's different from teaching at Mayfield. The girls there came from similar backgrounds with similar expectations. Here, I'll have students of various ages and experiences." Kent straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You'll manage. Those children need what you can offer, not just reading and writing, but a broader vision of what's possible for them." His faith in her abilities warmed Hannah more than she could express. "Thank you for everything, Kent. I don't know how I can ever repay your kindness." He shook his head. "No repayment needed. Just do right by those children." A thought occurred to Hannah. "Will I still see you? Besides, when you bring the boys for school, I mean." Kent's expression softened. "I meant what I said about continuing your riding lessons. And I come to town regularly for council meetings and supplies." He hesitated. "That is, if you'd welcome the company." "I would," Hannah said quickly. "Very much." They stood looking at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Kent took a half step closer, then seemed to reconsider. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "You need to prepare for tomorrow, and I've cattle needing attention." At the door, he paused. "You've got everything you need, food, firewood?" "Yes, thanks to you and Emily." Kent nodded, satisfied. "Lock your doors at night. Town's generally safe, but better cautious than sorry." His concern touched her. "I will." Another moment of hesitation, then Kent surprised her by reaching out to take her hand. His touch was warm and solid, his calloused palm rough against her smoother skin. "You're going to be just fine, Hannah James," he said softly. "Better than fine. This town doesn't know how lucky it is to have found you." Before she could respond, he raised her hand briefly to his lips, the gesture so quick and light she might have imagined it, then released her and stepped outside. "I'll bring the boys by around 8 tomorrow," he called over his shoulder, already moving toward his wagon. "Good luck with your first day." Hannah stood in the doorway watching until his wagon disappeared around the bend, her hand still tingling where his lips had brushed it. Despite the flutter of nerves about tomorrow's responsibilities, a deeper sense of contentment settled over her. For the first time since arriving in Montana territory, she felt truly at home, not because of the building around her, but because of the connections she'd formed, especially with the tall, quietly compelling man who had just ridden away. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity as Hannah settled into her role as Silver Creek schoolteacher. Her class quickly grew to 17 students, ranging in age from 6 to 15. As Kent had warned, they came from diverse backgrounds, children of ranchers, merchants, miners, and even 2 from the small Chinese community that had established itself on the town's edge. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying. Hannah found herself adapting her Boston teaching methods to suit the practical needs of frontier children, incorporating lessons about local geography, plant identification, and weather patterns alongside traditional subjects. True to his word, Kent brought Samuel and Joseph to school each Monday morning and collected them Friday afternoons for weekends at the ranch. These brief encounters became highlights of Hannah's week, though they rarely had time for more than quick exchanges about the boys' progress and ranch happenings. On her second weekend in town, Kent arrived unexpectedly on Saturday morning, leading Daisy and his own horse. "Thought you might be ready for that promised ride," he said when Hannah opened her door, surprise evident on her face. "Unless you're too busy with school preparations." Hannah's heart leapt at the sight of him. "Not too busy at all. Give me just a moment to change." They rode along the creek that gave the town its name, Kent pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the area's early settlement. Hannah found herself laughing more than she had in years, charmed by his dry humor and the evident pleasure he took in showing her his beloved Montana. The riding lessons became a regular Saturday ritual. Kent would arrive mid-morning, sometimes bearing small gifts, fresh eggs from the ranch chickens, a book he thought she might enjoy, wildflowers picked along the trail. They would ride for hours, exploring new territory each time, talking easily about everything from literature to ranching techniques. Hannah treasured these outings, not just for the beauty of the landscape or the growing skills she developed as a rider, but for the deepening connection with Kent. Away from town, he relaxed more, revealing a thoughtful, sometimes poetic side beneath his practical cowboy exterior. During one such ride in early June, they stopped to rest by a small lake nestled in the foothills. While the horses grazed nearby, Hannah and Kent sat on sun-warmed rocks, sharing the lunch Emily had packed for them. "I had a letter from Boston yesterday," Hannah mentioned, breaking off a piece of bread. "From my former headmistress." Kent looked up with interest. "Good news, I hope." "She offered me my position back," Hannah said carefully, watching his reaction. "Apparently my replacement isn't working out as hoped." Kent's expression stilled, though he tried to hide it. "Will you go?" he asked, his voice deliberately casual. Hannah shook her head. "I've already declined. Silver Creek is my home now." The relief that crossed his face was unmistakable. "Glad to hear it. The children would miss you terribly." "Just the children?" Hannah asked boldly. Kent met her eyes, something warm and intent in his gaze. "No, not just the children." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Kent moved slightly closer on the rock, his hand coming to rest beside hers, their fingers nearly touching. "Hannah," he began, his voice rougher than usual. "These past weeks," a distant rumble of thunder interrupted him. They both looked up to see dark clouds gathering over the mountains to the west. "Storm coming," Kent said, clearly reluctant to end the moment but ever practical. "We should head back before it hits." They rode home at a faster pace than usual, racing the approaching weather. Just as they reached the outskirts of town, fat raindrops began to fall, quickly becoming a downpour that had them laughing and spurring the horses to greater speed. By the time they reached Hannah's quarters, they were both soaked through. Kent insisted on seeing to the horses despite the rain, waving off Hannah's concerns about his drenched state. "I've worked cattle in worse," he assured her. "But you should get inside and warm up before you catch cold." Hannah hesitated at her door. "At least come in and dry off before you head back to the ranch." "Please. I can make hot coffee." After a moment's consideration, Kent nodded, tying the horses under the schoolhouse overhang where they would be somewhat sheltered from the rain. Inside, Hannah stoked the fire while Kent removed his dripping coat and hat. She brought him a towel for his hair, then busied herself making coffee, suddenly shy about having him in her private space despite their many hours together on the trail. "Your school is coming along nicely," Kent observed, looking through the open door to the classroom where students' work now adorned the walls. "Emily says the boys talk of nothing else at the ranch." "They're bright children," Hannah replied, pleased by the praise. "All of my students are. They just needed opportunity and guidance." The coffee ready, she poured 2 cups and brought them to the small table where Kent now sat, his hair damp but no longer dripping, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms. Hannah was suddenly, acutely aware of his physical presence in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be during their rides. "Thank you," he said, accepting the coffee. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, sending a small jolt through Hannah despite the innocence of the contact. They talked of safe topics as they drank the weather, town gossip, plans for Silver Creek's upcoming Independence Day celebration. But beneath the casual conversation ran an undercurrent of awareness, of unspoken feelings growing too strong to ignore. When Kent finally rose to leave, the rain had slowed to a gentle patter. "Thank you for the coffee," he said, retrieving his hat and coat which had dried somewhat by the fire, "and for another enjoyable ride." At the door he paused. "Hannah, what I started to say at the lake." She looked up at him expectantly, heart quickening. "Yes." Kent seemed to struggle with his words, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I'm not good at this sort of thing, never have been, but these past weeks, riding with you, talking with you." He took a deep breath. "You've come to mean a great deal to me." Hannah's breath caught. "You've come to mean a great deal to me too, Kent." He stepped closer, one hand coming up to gently touch her cheek. "I know it hasn't been long since you arrived. And after what happened with Winters, I'd understand if you needed more time before considering another attachment." "I don't need more time," Hannah said softly. "Not with you." Kent's eyes darkened at her words. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Hannah responded without hesitation, her hands coming up to rest on his chest as the kiss deepened into something warm and certain. When they finally parted, Kent rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I saw you in that blue dress at the social," he admitted. Hannah smiled. "I've been hoping you would since that same night." He kissed her again, briefly but with feeling. "I should go," he said reluctantly, "before this rain picks up again and before I forget myself entirely." At the door he turned back. "I'll see you tomorrow for Sunday services." Hannah nodded. "I'll save you a seat." After he left, Hannah stood at the window watching until he disappeared from view, her lips still tingling from his kiss. The thunderstorm that had interrupted their moment at the lake had, in its own way, led to something even more meaningful, a clear acknowledgement of what had been growing between them since that first day at the train station. As spring blossomed into summer, Hannah and Kent's courtship progressed with the steady, unhurried certainty that characterized everything about him. Their Saturday rides continued, now interspersed with picnics where stolen kisses became increasingly frequent. On Wednesday evenings, Kent would often join Hannah for supper after his town council meetings, the two of them talking late into the night about their hopes and dreams. Silver Creek embraced their relationship with the pragmatic approval of a frontier community that valued strong partnerships above romantic notions. Emily was particularly delighted, confessing to Hannah that she'd been hoping for just such a development since the day Kent had brought her home from the train station. "Never seen my brother look at anyone the way he looks at you," she said during one of Hannah's Sunday visits to the ranch. "Like you're both the most fascinating puzzle he's ever encountered, and the answer to a question he didn't know he was asking." Hannah blushed, but couldn't deny the accuracy of Emily's observation. Kent regarded her with a mixture of admiration, desire, and deep respect that made her feel truly seen for perhaps the first time in her life. For his part, Kent courted Hannah with thoughtful gestures rather than grand declarations. A shelf appeared in her classroom, perfectly sized for her growing collection of reference books. A sturdy porch swing materialized outside her quarters, ideal for reading in the evening light. Fresh wildflowers arrived weekly, sometimes delivered by Kent himself, other times by one of his ranch hands riding into town, Independence Day brought the entire territory together for a celebration in Silver Creek. Bunting decorated the buildings. Tables groaned with food contributed by every household, and competitions of all sorts entertained the crowd throughout the day. Kent surprised everyone by entering the horse race, not his usual event, riding the spirited black gelding that Hannah had admired on her first day at the ranch. "He's doing it to impress you," Emily whispered as they watched the riders line up. "He's trained that horse special, just for today." Sure enough, Kent and the black gelding won handily, outpacing riders half his age with a display of horsemanship that drew cheers from the crowd. When he collected his prize, a silver belt buckle, he immediately presented it to Hannah. "For my good luck charm," he said, pressing it into her palm before kissing her lightly, heedless of the onlookers. That evening, as they watched fireworks together from a blanket spread on a hillside above town, Kent broached the subject they'd both been circling. "Hannah," he began, his voice serious in the darkness, "you know I'm not one for fancy words or grand gestures." She squeezed his hand. "I've never needed those things. Good, because what I'm trying to say is—" He took a deep breath. "I love you. Have since that day at the lake, probably before. And if you think you might feel the same way, I'd like to court you properly, with marriage in mind." Hannah's heart soared at his words, simple and direct as they were. "Kent Irwin, I fell in love with you somewhere between the train station and your front porch that first day. And yes, I'd very much like to be courted properly, with marriage in mind." The kiss that followed put the fireworks to shame, at least in Hannah's estimation. When they finally broke apart, Kent held her close against the cool night air, his voice soft against her hair. "Funny how life works out," he mused. "You came west looking for one future and found another entirely." "A better one," Hannah said firmly, "one I never could have imagined for myself." As summer progressed into early fall, their courtship deepened. Kent began including Hannah in discussions about the ranch's future, seeking her thoughts on everything from expanding the herd to improving the main house. Hannah, in turn, consulted him about her plans for the school, including her hope to add a library wing if the town continued to grow. They moved together in an easy partnership that felt natural and right, as if they'd known each other far longer than the few months since that fateful day at the train depot. The only shadow on their happiness came from Kent's increasing concern about land speculators moving into the territory, buying up smaller ranches and threatening the way of life he'd worked so hard to build. "They're offering good money," he explained during one of their rides in early September. "But once they control enough land, they'll dictate cattle prices, water rights, everything. Men who have never worked the land making decisions for those of us who live and die by it." Hannah listened thoughtfully. "What can be done?" "Not much, legally. They're operating within the law." Kent's expression hardened. "But a few of us larger ranchers have formed an association. If we stand together, control enough grazing land between us, we might hold them off." "That sounds sensible," Hannah observed. "Unity against a common threat." Kent smiled at her pragmatic response. "This is why I love you, Hannah James. No hysterics, just practical consideration of the problem." "Hysterics never solved anything," she replied with a smile. "Besides, I have every confidence in your ability to protect what you've built." The subject turned to more personal matters as they rode home. Hannah had received an offer from the Territorial Education Board to help develop a standardized curriculum for rural schools, a part-time position she could hold while continuing to teach in Silver Creek. "You should accept," Kent encouraged. "It's an important opportunity and you're exactly the right person for it." Hannah studied him thoughtfully. "It would mean occasional trips to Helena for meetings." "I can survive a few days without you," Kent assured her, though his expression suggested he wouldn't enjoy it. "Your work matters, Hannah. I'd never ask you to set it aside." His support meant everything to her. So many men would have expected a wife to abandon her professional interests upon marriage, but Kent seemed to value her mind and ambitions as much as her heart. That evening, as they sat together on her porch swing watching the sunset, Kent brought up a subject they'd been gradually approaching. "I've been thinking," he began, his arm warm around her shoulders. "No sense in waiting too long for the wedding. Winter will be here before we know it, and travel gets difficult." Hannah's heart skipped. "What are you suggesting?" "October," Kent said decisively. "After harvest, but before the first snows. Simple ceremony at the church, celebration at the ranch afterward." He glanced down at her. "Unless you want something grander. Emily mentioned you might want to write to friends in Boston, have them attend." Hannah shook her head. "October sounds perfect. And I have no need for a grand affair. The people who matter most to me are already here." Kent's smile was worth more than any elaborate ceremony could have been. "Then it's settled. 1 month to prepare should be plenty of time, don't you think?" "More than enough," Hannah agreed, leaning up to seal the decision with a kiss. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Silver Creek. Hannah found herself the recipient of congratulations, advice, and offers of help from every quarter. Her students presented her with a handmade card signed by each of them, while the town ladies organized a sewing circle to help prepare her trousseau. The only discordant note came, ironically, from Philip Winters himself. In mid-September, he reappeared in Silver Creek, sunburned and trail-worn from his California adventure, apparently expecting to find Hannah still waiting for him. She was grading papers in her classroom when a shadow fell across her desk. Looking up, she found herself staring into a face she recognized from a small photograph once enclosed with a letter full of false promises. "Miss James?" The man inquired with a smile that might once have seemed charming, but now struck her as merely calculating. "I'm Philip Winters. I believe you were expecting me some months ago." Hannah set down her pen, keeping her expression neutral despite the shock of seeing him. "Mr. Winters, you're rather late." He had the grace to look somewhat abashed. "Business in California took longer than expected. No way to send word." His eyes roamed over her face appreciatively. "But I'm here now, ready to make good on our arrangement." Before Hannah could formulate a properly scathing response, another voice spoke from the classroom doorway. "There is no arrangement, Winters." Kent stood there, hat in hand, his expression controlled but dangerous. Hannah remembered he'd mentioned stopping by after checking cattle prices at the mercantile. Winters turned, sizing Kent up with a quick glance. "This is a private conversation, friend." "No, it isn't," Hannah said firmly, rising from her desk. "Mr. Winters, whatever agreement we once had was nullified when you failed to meet me at the station 5 months ago. I've built a new life here, one that doesn't include you." Winters frowned. "Now see here, I spent good money bringing you west, money you'll not be getting back," Kent interrupted, moving to stand beside Hannah. "Miss James doesn't owe you anything." Winters looked between them, comprehension dawning. "I see how it is. Found yourself a better prospect, did you?" He directed this at Hannah, his tone ugly. "I found someone worthy of trust and respect," Hannah replied evenly. "Something you know nothing about, Mr. Winters." Kent's hand came to rest at the small of her back, a silent gesture of support. "I think you should leave, Winters. Miss James has made herself clear." For a moment, Winters looked as if he might argue further. Then, noting the determined set of Kent's jaw and the unified front they presented, he shrugged. "Your loss," he muttered, directing a final glare at Hannah before brushing past Kent and out the door. Once he was gone, Hannah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Well, that was unexpected. Kent studied her face. You all right? Perfectly, Hannah assured him and found she meant it. Seeing Philip Winters, the man whose promises had brought her west, whose abandonment had initially seemed so devastating, she felt nothing but relief that his broken word had led her to where she now stood, beside a man of genuine integrity and heart. Actually, she added, I'm grateful to him in a strange way. If he'd been waiting at that station as promised, I'd never have met you. Kent's expression softened. His foolishness, my good fortune. He glanced toward the door where Winters had exited. Think he'll cause trouble? Hannah shook her head. I doubt it. Men like that move on quickly when they don't get their way. Her assessment proved correct. By the following day, word circulated that Winters had left town, apparently heading north toward the Canadian territories. Hannah put the incident from her mind, focusing instead on the approaching wedding and the future it promised. October arrived with crisp mornings and golden afternoons. The mountains surrounding Silver Creek painted in autumn hues of red and gold. Wedding preparations accelerated as the date drew near. Emily orchestrated much of it, insisting that Hannah continue her teaching duties while she handled the details. You'll have enough to manage with moving your things to the ranch, she pointed out. Besides, I've been planning Kent's wedding in my head for years. Let me have my fun. The night before the wedding, Hannah sat alone in her quarters, surrounded by packed trunks and crates. Most of her belongings would move to the ranch the following day after the ceremony. Kent had suggested they build a new house of their own on ranch land. But for the immediate future, they would live in the main house while Emily, Daniel, and the boys relocated to a recently completed larger home nearby. A knock at her door roused Hannah from her thoughts. Opening it, she found Kent standing there, a small package in his hands. I know it's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding, he said with a small smile, but I wanted to give you this tonight, in private. Hannah welcomed him in, curious about his unscheduled visit. What is it? Kent handed her the package, wrapped in simple brown paper and string. Something that should have been yours from the beginning. Hannah unwrapped it carefully to reveal a worn leather journal. Opening it, she found pages filled with a neat, masculine hand dates, observations, brief thoughts. It took her a moment to realize what she was holding. Your journal, she asked, confused. Kent nodded. Started at the day I found you at the station. Wanted to remember everything, how you looked standing there alone, how brave you were despite being abandoned, how you insisted on maintaining your dignity even when accepting help. Hannah turned the pages slowly, reading snippets of Kent's private thoughts over the months of their acquaintance. His early admiration, his growing attraction, his internal debates about whether she might someday care for him. The entries were sparse but revealing, showing her their relationship from his perspective in a way conversation never could. Kent, she breathed, deeply moved. This is the most precious gift anyone has ever given me. He took her hands, journal and all, in his larger ones. I'm not always good with words, Hannah, but I wanted you to know I've been falling in love with you since that first day. Tomorrow we start our life together officially, but in my heart, it began the moment I lifted your trunk and promised you a home. Hannah's eyes filled with tears of joy. I love you, Kent Irwin, more than I ever thought possible. Their kiss was tender, full of promise and shared dreams. When they finally parted, Kent touched her cheek gently. Tomorrow, he said softly, tomorrow you'll be my wife. And you'll be my husband, Hannah replied, the words filling her with quiet elation. The journey here wasn't what I expected, but the destination is far better than I could have dreamed. The following day dawned clear and perfect, as if Montana itself blessed their union. Hannah dressed in the blue silk gown Emily had altered for her first town social. now modified again with additional lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was arranged simply but elegantly, adorned with wildflowers rather than a traditional veil. The small church overflowed with well-wishers, students and their parents, ranchers from throughout the territory, townspeople who had embraced Hannah as their own. Judge Millerson walked her down the aisle in the absence of her father, his normally gruff demeanor softened by the occasion. Kent waited at the altar, more handsome than Hannah had ever seen him in a new black suit. His eyes never left her as she walked toward him, his expression one of wonder and deep love. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promising love, fidelity, and partnership through whatever life might bring them. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kent's kiss was both tender and possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward at the Irwin Ranch lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the territory. Hannah danced not only with her new husband but with numerous ranchers, merchants, and even her older students, all eager to wish her happiness. As the festivities continued around them, Kent led Hannah away from the crowded yard to a quiet spot near the river where they had first ridden together months earlier. In the moonlight, he presented her with a final wedding gift, the deed to a parcel of land on a rise overlooking the ranch, where their new home would stand. "It has the best view on the property," he told her. "I've been saving it for something special, for someone special." Hannah studied the document, then looked up at her husband with shining eyes. "It's perfect, just like everything since I met you." Kent's arms encircled her, strong and sure. "Welcome home, Hannah Irwin." And as his lips met hers beneath the vast Montana sky, Hannah knew she had indeed found home, not just in this beautiful, wild territory, but in the heart of the man who had seen her stranded and alone and offered not just shelter, but a future filled with love, respect, and endless possibility. 3 years later, Hannah stood on the porch of their home, the beautiful house Kent had built on the rise overlooking the ranch, watching her husband approach on horseback. Behind him rode their foreman, Charlie, both men returning from checking fences along the property's northern boundary. At Hannah's feet, a sturdy toddler with his father's wheat-colored hair and her green eyes clapped his hands in excitement. "Papa," William Irwin called, his chubby legs carrying him down the steps as fast as they could manage. Kent dismounted in one fluid motion, scooping his son into his arms before the boy could reach the horses. "There's my cowboy," he said, tossing William gently in the air and drawing delighted giggles from the child. Hannah descended the steps more sedately, one hand resting on the slight swell of her belly where their second child grew. Kent's eyes softened as they always did when he saw her, even after 3 years of marriage. "How are my girls today?" he asked, leaning to kiss her while still holding William. "We're well," Hannah replied, smiling at his certainty that this baby would be a daughter, "though your son has been asking for you since breakfast." Kent settled William on his shoulders. "Been busy, son. Making sure our cattle have good grass and clean water." The boy patted his father's hat. "Ride horses later, maybe tomorrow," Kent promised, "if you're good for your mama tonight." As Charlie led the horses toward the barn, Kent and Hannah walked together toward the house, their son chattering happily above them. The ranch had prospered under Kent's steady management, expanding to nearly 20,000 acres over the past 3 years. The land speculators he'd worried about had eventually moved on to easier territories, defeated by the Ranchers Association Kent had helped establish. Hannah's school in Silver Creek had grown as well. With 32 students now and a recently hired assistant teacher, it had become one of the most respected educational establishments in the territory. The library wing Hannah had dreamed of was nearly complete, funded by a combination of town council allocations and donations from grateful parents. "Letter came for you today," Hannah mentioned as they reached the porch. "From the territorial governor's office." Kent's eyebrows rose in surprise. "What would the governor want with me?" "Perhaps it has to do with that educational initiative you supported last spring, the one for rural teacher training." Inside their comfortable home, Hannah prepared coffee while Kent read the letter at the kitchen table, William now contentedly playing with wooden blocks on the floor nearby. "Well," Kent said finally, looking up from the paper, "seems the governor wants me to serve on a commission. Something about land use policies for the new state once we achieve statehood." Hannah sat beside him, pride evident in her expression. "That's a significant honor." Kent shrugged, though she could tell he was pleased. "Means trips to Helena, time away from you and William." "We'll manage," Hannah assured him, covering his hand with hers. "It's important work, Kent, the kind that will shape Montana's future for generations." He turned his hand to clasp hers. "Speaking of the future, Emily mentioned the town council is considering expanding the school again, adding upper grades so the older children don't have to go to Helena for advanced education." "That would be wonderful," Hannah agreed, "though we'd need at least one more qualified teacher." Kent's eyes twinkled. "Good thing I happen to know a very qualified teacher who might be convinced to return from temporary retirement after the baby comes." Hannah laughed. "I've missed teaching full-time," she admitted, "though I wouldn't trade these years with William for anything." "No reason you can't do both if that's what you want," Kent said seriously. "We can arrange help with the children. Emily would be thrilled to have them at her house some days." Hannah studied her husband's face, still moved after all this time by his unwavering support of her professional aspirations alongside their family life. "Have I told you lately that I love you, Kent Irwin?" "Not since breakfast," he replied with a smile, leaning across the table to kiss her. Later that evening, after William was asleep and the lamps were turned low, Hannah and Kent sat together on their porch swing, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. The air held the crispness of approaching autumn, and somewhere in the distance, coyotes called to one another across the vast landscape. "Sometimes I still can't believe how everything turned out," Hannah mused, her head resting comfortably against Kent's shoulder. "That day at the train station seems both yesterday and a lifetime ago." Kent's arm tightened around her. "Best day of my life finding you there, though at the time I just thought I was helping a stranded traveler." Hannah smiled in the darkness. "And I thought you were simply a kind stranger offering temporary shelter. I never imagined that we'd build all this together," Kent finished when her voice trailed off. His hand came to rest gently on her rounded belly. "A home, a family, a future. A love I never knew was possible," Hannah added softly. They sat in companionable silence for a time, content in each other's presence, and the life they'd created together. The ranch stretched around them, peaceful in the gathering night, while inside their home their son slept safely, and within Hannah's body their second child grew stronger each day. "No regrets?" Kent asked finally, the question he still posed occasionally, as if amazed by his good fortune. Hannah turned her face up to his, her answer the same as always, but no less true for the repetition. "Not a single one." And as his lips met hers in the starlight, Hannah sent a silent thanks to whatever fate or providence had led her to this place, this man, this life that had begun with abandonment and disappointment, but had blossomed into something far richer and more profound than any mail-order arrangement could have provided. In the end, being left at that depot had been her greatest blessing, for it had led her to Kent Irwin, the man who had lifted her trunk and promised her not just a home, but a heart to call her own.